Good afternoon. We're going to get started here, so if you haven't found a seat, if you could do so, that would be great. My name is Richard Potter. I'm Director of K-State's Office of Corporate Engagement, and I want to thank everybody for reserving time to participate in the Working with Industry Boot Camp series. I do want to give a shout out to Paul Lowe. This is kind of his brainchild. He put the initial draft together of the syllabus that you received up here, and then there was a group of us who worked to flesh it out, and we've been at it for several weeks now, so it's nice to finally get this kicked off. We weren't really sure what to expect in terms of attendance, and as you may have noted, we had to move to a bigger room. There are over 100 participants who have registered for the series, including those in Olathe and Salina and out of the Extension offices, and we're looking forward to getting started. Today's orientation, for the orientation we have three presenters. President Schulz will talk about the importance of industry engagement and how it crosses all of the themes of K-State 2025, and he'll also introduce some models of strategic engagement. Fred Cholick, the president of the K-State University Foundation, is going to speak a little bit on how industry engagement and public-private partnerships relate to the mission of the land-grant university and some of the benefits of public-private partnerships to industry and to the university. And then our final speaker today is Karen Burg, Vice President of Research. She'll be talking about how industry engagement relates to research, scholarly and creative activity and discovery. She'll talk about some existing and emerging support resources that you can access and provide an overview of some of the upcoming sessions in the series. We've reserved time at the end for question and answer. There are microphones here in the room. We'd appreciate it if you would come down to the mic, one of these mics, when for asking your question. For those of you who are participating via the live stream, the video, you can email your questions to me, and hopefully you have on the live feed, yes, the slide that has my email, rmpotter@ksu.edu. You can also engage in the conversation on Twitter @KStateCorporate, #KSUIndustryBC for boot camp. I do want to note the draft syllabus that was handed out and is available. You should have received it in an email as well in PDF format. If you're watching online, you should have on that page with the live stream access to the PDF of the syllabus. It is in draft form. We do want your feedback as you're listening today, and as you look through that syllabus, we do want your feedback. And we'll do our best to incorporate, if there's something about corporate engagement that is a burning question on your mind and you don't see it listed in that syllabus somewhere, or you're not aware where it might be, send an email to me and we'll do our best to incorporate that as we prepare for the future sessions. Final note, there is professional development credit available from Human Resources for this series. If you would send an email to orsp@ksu.edu with credit in the subject line. ORSP is the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs. So if you are interested in receiving professional development credit for this workshop series, send an email to orsp@kstate.edu. and we'll make sure that happens. There is, following this session in the courtyard, a refreshments and networking session following the series, so we hope that the Manhattan participants will Stick around for some networking. And for those of you who are participating online, we'll try and send some virtual cookies to you. So, and with that in mind, now I want to turn the podium over to President Schulz.
Oh, thank you. Cool. Everybody smile. There we go. All right, cool. That'll be out there in the Twitter universe very soon. So, well, thank you all for coming, and thank you for your interest in this particular area. I think it's a great opportunity for Kansas State University as we look towards the future on ways that we can continue to work more effectively across the board, and I think that's what you're going to see with many of our corporate partners in this region, nationally and internationally. So what I want to do today is just kick this off a little bit. I want to acknowledge some of the people that really worked to put this together, describe really what I think, how do you measure the value of a corporate relationship? And I think this is really a key thing, because as we look at this, and as we try and grow this on campus, at some point we want to assess, are we doing better? Is it just the number that we have? Is it the quality that we have? And one of the graphs I'm going to show really tries to quantify how we might look at corporate partnerships. So there's a whole number of folks that have been involved with putting this on. And Paul has certainly been a leader in this. Katie Small in pre-award, Mary Lou Marino in sponsored programs, Mitzi with the foundation, Rebecca Robinson with the Institute for Commercialization, Ken Williams, Institute for Commercialization, and Richard Potter, Director of Office of Corporate Engagement. And I also want to acknowledge our Vice President of Research, Karen, for coming in and really encouraging some of this. One of the things we want to do is have more things available on campus with a lot of the expertise we have here to help you all as faculty and staff be able to do some of the things that you would like to do in a more effective way. So people don't have to go out to find this. We want to make sure we do a lot of these things here. So what's our vision? And this came out of the 2025 planning process for the Office of Corporate Engagement that then morphed a little bit to sort of corporate relations as a whole. The Kansas State University will be the partner of choice for a growing number of strategic corporate partnerships that result in innovative research, diverse business solutions, and advance common interests and goals. Motherhood, apple pie, I mean, this sounds awesome. But I think it's important to keep in mind some of the things that we would like to try and do. And I need a drink of water. So certainly, I couldn't speak to any group associated with K-State without mentioning K-State 2025. So as you might expect, as the plan was being developed, and everybody, a lot of folks in this room were involved and engaged in putting that together, there was a lot all through the different themes. There was a lot of talk about that increasing our work and our relationships with corporate America was going to be a kind of a key part. So it was a common thread in a lot of the action plans. Declining federal and state support, it seems like that's what I spend my spring semester talking about, is declining state support. So one of the things that we need to do is look for alternative funding streams, again, to allow people to do the things that you'd like to do. And working with corporate partners does not work for everybody. Does not work for everybody's research and scholarship area or every idea that we have. But for certain folks, it makes a big difference and can lend some great relevancy and a feeling of impact that you get something done, you say, you know, somebody's actually going to use that. And the corporate relationships contribute to most of the metrics in all 7 of our thematic goals. So just as a quick reminder of the themes from K-State 2025, the first on research, scholarly and creative activities and discovery, undergraduate educational experience, graduate scholarly experience, engagement, extension, outreach, and service, faculty and staff, facilities and infrastructure, athletics. All of these have some role to play in as we are more successful with our corporate partners. So one of the things, though, that I think we're going to have to do is how do we do this? Each of you as faculty may have relationships that could be long-standing and have been there for many, many years, where you've worked with colleagues in a particular industry, and you value those relationships, and you also want to protect that. I mean, last thing you want is somebody from Anderson Hall coming in and we're going to make it better and wind up ruining everything. So one of the things that I think we want to really do is how can we put infrastructure in place to support the types of things that you want to do. And I think that's going to be kind of a part of not just my talk today, but other things throughout this workshop. One of the things is we don't have to go out and always reinvent the wheel. So as we look out at who's really doing this well, the University of Michigan has got a great program that they do with corporate relations and corporate relationships between the university and those particular corporations, where they preserved a lot of the individual type of relationships that are there, but found ways to broaden them out in a win-win for everybody. And I think the last point here is very important. Corporations are investors. They're not just coming to recruit our students, and they're not just places that we can go and get philanthropic dollars to do projects. They really need to be considered partners. And again, this is setting up the groundwork. Most of you would agree with that statement, and I think it's the kind of thing we need to continue to keep in mind as we look forward. One of the other things, though, that I think, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, is we sit down and speak with a particular corporation, and it's very transactional in nature. I want them to financially support this building project that we're doing, or to hire students, or I've got something that sort of, at the end of it, you check a box off and you go, hey, we were successful because we did this. If we talk about individual donors to the institution, just to use that as an example, it's not necessarily transactional. We're getting to know them, we build a relationship, we talk back and forth about what the institution is trying to do and what that individual or family is interested in supporting and all that. So by the time we actually get to something, it's really around a relationship, not around a single point. And we need to do the same thing with a lot of our corporations. And we have some that I would say fall in this category already for K-State. They recruit, they give us money, they're here and supporting things on campus, they come to student organizations, they do research. They do all of these kinds of things. And if you ask somebody at that company who is one of your key partners, they would say, oh, Kansas State University. They really affect us from top to bottom. That's really where we want to get to. So doing this, though, is going to be one of the keys to achieving many of our 2025 goals. So this chart, and I've seen a variety of this around, so let me kind of speak through this. One of the real questions on corporate engagement of any type is how do we measure who's really one of our engaged partners as institution, and how do we measure one that might not be engaged? And so if you're setting a set of goals, you may say, well, we want some in the very highest end that are really engaged with everything, but we also need to acknowledge there are going to be some new people that may not have done anything with us institutionally, no research. They don't hire graduates, or they used to hire graduates, or all through a number of things. And so you need a way to kind of measure each of those. So what's shown on this graph here is phase one, which is at the end, is kind of a traditional engagement. And this would be sort of at the beginning level, career fairs, they interview people. And as we move to this direction, to phase five, we really get up to a strategic partner. And it's cumulative. So by the time we get to phase three, you're at career fairs and you're interviewing our students, but you're also doing research grants or software grants, working with student organizations and so on and so forth. Now, everybody can add different things or subtract things from the list, but I think it's a good way for us to look strategically at what we want is a whole lot of companies in the phase five area. The other experience I've had at multiple universities is when somebody is committed in a relationship and the economy takes a downturn, they're still there. They may not do everything they were doing before, but they're still there. Sometimes folks who were just there because they need to hire chemical engineers and they thought you had great chemical engineers at your place, as soon as the economy goes down, well, you know, we got other places we're going to go work with. I use that as just a minuscule example, but if you have that relationship and that strategic partnership, they're there all through thick and thin. So when things are great, you got lots of stuff going. When things aren't so good, you still have them active and engaged with faculty and staff on campus, and this is where we want to get to. So as we go through the boot camp and the workshop and all those kinds of things, institutionally, this is where we want to go, is build more strategic partners out there, which means they're sponsoring your research and scholarship, they're supporting graduate students, postdocs, they're hiring our students, they're active and involved on campus or with student organizations. We're talking about intellectual property, we have blanket agreements. You know, we've really made it simple for us to work with each other, and that's where eventually we want to go. Will everybody be a strategic partner? No. But we want to make sure that we're moving companies in this particular direction and that we get out of, sometimes we'll come to K-State and get undergrads, but if we need research done, we're going to go to Michigan. Or if we need this, we're going to go somewhere else. We need to be seen as a comprehensive partner as well, and I know some of the other speakers will talk about this. So just as I finish up, vision, be that partner of choice for a growing number of strategic corporate partners that result in innovative research, diverse business solutions, and advance the common interests and goals. I think it's a great thing for us to be looking at doing, and I applaud everybody being here today to learn a little bit more. And as I look to the audience, there's some folks here who've got extensive long-term work with corporate American industry, and you all could be up here teaching this. So I also applaud, we've got a lot of people here that just are experienced as well and can lend their voices to, I think, some great conversations. So with that, I think Fred Cholick's going to come up from the foundation. Oh, Richard, you going to come up? Fred's going to come up.
You want to take any questions?
Well, sir, I haven't said anything worthy of questions, but I'm happy to take questions. Any questions? Cool. That's a gifted speaker when you can speak and nobody has questions and nobody fell asleep. So if you want to take a nap, now would be a good time to get comfortable. And Fred.
Thank you. As Richard gets this up, I think at the last minute they asked me to add an introductory slide to this, partly because there's a number of people here that I know, but there's a number of you don't know, and probably trying to figure out why I'm in front of you. So I'll have an introductory slide here as soon as the PowerPoint gets up. Disclaimer, these are not the opinions of Kansas State University or Kansas State University Foundation. These are the opinions of Fred Cholick. So you kind of need to do that. And I'm going to talk a little bit, as Richard talked about, land grant, and I'm going to talk a little bit about personal experiences over my career. That's about all I can. I could have Kirk sing and dance if he wanted to, but I don't think he'd probably want to come up here and do that, would you? No. I have it in my pocket as well if you need the jump drive. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. So what I am the president and CEO of the foundation. I come at you with a little bit different perspective. I have a PhD in plant breeding and genetics a few years ago. I spent 5 years working with USAID in international ag development in about 9 countries throughout that 5 years. I had 10 years of research and teaching experience within a university, and in 1991 I went to the dark side of the moon and became an administrator. 20 years at university administration, 5 years now at the foundation, and I have officially announced my retirement on March 31st of this year. That's kind of the end of my disclaimers. So I'm going to start with the land-grant university from my perspective. And I do this partly to eliminate a myth. And one of the myths is land-grant universities are all about agriculture. No, they're 150 years old, and they're all about a comprehensive university. But 150 years ago, that comprehensive university revolved around agriculture. It revolves around a lot of things today in the system. You know, develop that next generation. Teach and learn. Teaching's important, learning's more important. I spent 10 years in the classroom, and I had the experience of turning around and looking at the class, and you know that deer in the headlight look? You know that look? And I threw away the notes and started over, because obviously I was teaching, but they weren't learning. Happened to be Hardy-Weinberg Law of Equilibrium. How many know the Hardy-Weinberg Law of Equilibrium? There's a couple of geneticists in the crowd. I'm impressed. Develop new knowledge and products. Research, scholarly activity as we talk about it. And then finally, that service, extension, outreach component. I put research, scholarly activity in the middle for a very good reason, because it goes both ways. That scholarly activity goes for discovery, new products, new knowledge, but it also goes to our students. And I'm not just talking about graduate students, because I had a lot of great graduate students, but it goes to our undergrads as well. So it really is in the middle. How many know the Bayh-Dole Act? 5%. In my view, the Bayh-Dole Act, and Dole was the Kansas senator at the time, was a game changer in this whole paradigm that we're looking at in R&D, research and development. In the Bayh-Dole Act, if you want to go back and read through it, it changed the relationship a lot. It changed the expectations of academia that was receiving federal dollars. That relationship now was take that knowledge, put it in the marketplace, and incidentally, get a return on it, and reinvest that in research, in R&D. It's still debated, to be very honest with you, but to me it was a game changer as we look at that system in Bayh-Dole. Don't go back and read the act, it's very boring to read, but it really sets a different expectation for academia on the federal dollars, and I want to make that very clear on the federal dollars. So the landscape's changing, and I'm going to go through, I already said I had a PhD in breeding and genetics. I also have 2 minors in statistics. I apologize for that. I love numbers, and I'm going to use numbers. For a land-grant university and beyond, K-State being a land-grant university. So the mission's the same in my view, okay? But how we accomplish that mission is very different in today versus 150 years ago. So if you look it up in new knowledge development, how often do you think new knowledge is being developed today, doubling the knowledge we have today, globally? How many years? Come on, a number. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? 5 years, I got a 5. Anyone else? 8? Give me a number. I'll make you give me a number. I can stand here. 10. According to the latest literature, new knowledge, the knowledge we have today is doubling every 12 months, every year. If you go on and read that article, a futurist says by the year 2050, it's going to double every 12 hours. I can't tell you, I'm not going to be alive in 2050. But the whole key is that part of the why is because knowledge is being developed so fast. Part of the why is not that development of new knowledge is no longer occurring only in the academy. It's occurring in the private, public sectors as well. So that's part of that why this landscape is changing. So it's shifted from predominantly private sector, and I'm going to go through some numbers, USA numbers, in case I forget to say that. And so therefore, as Kirk said, he spends most of his spring semester defending the budget of Kansas State University. I would say probably most university presidents spend the spring semester defending the state budget and the fall semester defending the federal budget for support of research as we go through it. It truly is a public good. The problem is the public's not investing as they have in the past. I disagree with that. You know, that and $5 you can get a cup of coffee at Starbucks upstairs. But that's the reality that we live with. Maybe it'll shift, but it's not the reality that we live with today. So as I said, I got minors in statistics, so let's start to take a look at some numbers. And I always put a source on my numbers. So there's the source where I looked it up from Gov Statistics. It's percent U.S. total R&D. So it's the U.S., everything invested in R&D U.S.-wide on a percent basis. Okay? So 1953, well, I'll call that 50-50. Why not? It's close enough for government work. 2008, that's the latest numbers they have. The government's a little slow putting numbers out. And we'll call that 70-30, of a shift of total R&D from basically, in that time period, a little over 50 years, from a balanced public to basically a 70-30 split, okay, on a percent basis. Okay, let's go on and look at some more numbers. Total R&D in 2013 in dollars. Industry, $331 billion. If you add academia, government, federal government, I can't get any state numbers, but a lot of the state support for R&D would be through the academic system in the state and nonprofit. If you add these three together and multiply it by 2.5, you'll get real close to $330 billion. That's the shift that's occurring in the development of new knowledge, research and discovery in this country. I deliberately took international out because it starts to really skew some numbers, and I deliberately took USAID out because it's international development. I worked for them for 5 years. So this is R&D here for new knowledge and new discovery. I'm not going to apologize for shifting to agriculture. It is my background. And I will tell you that this shift is not equal in all segments of industry. And I'm going to give you an example where it is. So this is the agricultural 70 to 2009, public, private, and you just add it to the total. So it's been running about 50-50. Total R&D in our food system, okay? I'll just call it 50-50. It did cross over here and went above, and I cannot explain the rise here of the dip. The article didn't. Once again, this came out of the USDA database in the process. So we'll call it 50-50. Not all segments are equal. Public-private sector expenditures now in plant breeding and genetics. Remember I said in my beginning, I'm a plant breeder and I'm a geneticist by training. If you take a look at this sector, from 75 to 85, that 10-year period, we'll call it 2x. We'll call that 12.5x reduction, okay? And you take a look here what public sector has done. Up, and now it's about 12.5x of what the public sector is. Remember I talked about Bayh-Dole, and I talked about I'll talk about another back. In 1970, there was a federal act called the Plant Protection Act. The Plant Protection Act protected the interests of the private sector in the development of genetics and varieties. And so you've seen a tremendous investment in plant breeding because the companies can recoup their ROI. So I'm no longer a bench scientist, and I haven't been for a number of years. So if I was a bench scientist in breeding and genetics, as I was at the beginning of my career, the development of that new knowledge, if I don't have a public-private partnership, as I did in those years, look at what I don't have access to as a faculty member. Look at the knowledge I do not have access to because it's held privately, and unless you have a relationship with that private sector, you will not have access to the knowledge, you will not have access to the techniques. It's that simple as you take a look at that shift. Our role's changing. You know, I use a quote from a former board member that says the foundation's all about raising money and making money on the money. That's no longer the case. And it really hasn't been the case for a number of years as a foundation. You know, if I take a look at what I've said for the last 5 years, advocate through philanthropy by uniting donors with the university needs. The university always sets the needs. Now it's advocate for the university and facilitate partnerships. So let me give you a couple of examples of our changing world. How many have seen or driven by the State Department of Ag building out in the research park? Okay. The foundation built that building for State Department of Ag to move close to Kansas State University so that the Department of Ag, in what it does, could work more closely with the activities of Kansas State University. And we're getting a fair return on the real estate investment. I mean, that's our donors and everyone. But we basically borrowed money and we built the building. There's more and more of those types of partnerships that the foundation's dealing with. Kirk talked about companies being transactional, and they are. But you know, I would also say donors are somewhat transactional. How many donate totally undiscretionary dollars? Anyone? How many donate money to anything? A lot of you. You have some strings attached to that, right? My scholarship, my wife's in my scholarship for Kansas State Universities for undergraduates, okay? That's kind of what I want to support in the system, undergraduate scholarships. I would also tell you, and I see a lot of the development staff here, for every dollar I give to Ahern, a dollar goes to the band, because that's my wife's rules, okay? If you go to a football game with her, you can talk to her all you want, first and second quarter, third and fourth quarter, but don't interrupt her when the band's on the field. It's really pretty simple. That's her passion to support the band, and there's a lot of different reasons for that. The other thing Kirk talked about is relationships. Well, the foundation has a lot of relationships with alums and non-alums that are in the C-suites in these corporations. We have the relationship with them because they've supported Kansas State in some way. Well, if we have that relationship, we need to build on that relationship in that leader of that company in the C-suite, in the corporate C-suite. So if we already have the relationship, as I can talk about various companies, why not use that to further this partnership with the company in its entirety in that holistic format that Kirk has talked about? So just like yours, just like mine, just like Kansas State University, there's new opportunities that are coming forth, and I strongly encourage faculty to look at those opportunities. Public-private partnerships, PPMs, if you read the literature, are now a major approach to produce that knowledge and products. Okay? Remember, that was in the middle of that equation of what we are as a university, so it can flow to our students, undergraduates and graduates, can flow to our system. Okay? Benefits, shared knowledge. I've talked about this. I don't care what industry, what segment of this campus you're from, I will guarantee you there's significant private dollars being invested. If you don't have a partnership with the company or companies that invest that and have that knowledge, you won't get the return. You won't have access to that knowledge, and it'll prevent you from doing what you want to do in your careers. I've had a number of them. I'm going to talk about some pluses and minuses and personal examples in a minute. It's cost effective if you set up the range right, because now you have access to knowledge and they have access to knowledge to students. Means to produce the market, products to the market. How many think universities are really good at getting products to the market? Raise your hand. Kirk, you can raise your hand? No. It's not what we're about. It's not what we do. We have parts that do it very successfully, so don't get the wrong idea when I talk about this. And we do it very successfully with some products, i.e. wheat varieties, if you take a look at it, just as an example. But collectively, it's not our sweet spot. What do private companies do? That's what they think of every day. How they can get that product in a timely fashion from bench to market, because they're driven by ROI. And their stockholders drive that ROI. Local economic growth, quite often if you have these partnerships, that economic growth can occur locally. Obviously, it's great benefit to students. And I would contend having access to that knowledge, and it depends on your relationship, helps us develop that next generation of practitioners. I know it personally has, in my case, with graduate students. You have to work through some things, like publishing. Sometimes those can be hang-ups. But if you work through them, you can have that access to that latest knowledge. Some personal experience. I didn't start this, but I finished it. The development of soybean, it happened to be with Monsanto and Roundup Ready. They provided us the gene in the university I was at the time. We incorporated that gene into, at that point in time, the highest yielding Group 0 soybean with the greatest oil and protein content. Fabulous performance. We had no agreement with Monsanto to market because they owned the gene, the Roundup gene. It's the example I'm using. A year and a half later, who knows how many meetings, because I lost track, to the point where we threatened to take it to the elevator before we finally got an agreement. If we would have had that agreement ahead of time, it would have been a piece of cake. So we entered in another agreement in 2002 for the same thing to incorporate that gene into spring wheat. We had an agreement. They invested, in this case, a graduate student to help with the research. Now, they also made a corporate decision that they dropped it as a product line, which was fine. but we benefited a lot by knowing, particularly our molecular biologists knowing about it. Kirk's talked about this, holistic PPMs and individual PPMs. I've worked with Abbott Labs as a scientist. I worked with various components as a scientist in having knowledge to seed treatment and other things that helped agronomic traits. That was an individual relationship that I had with them. But ultimately, as Kirk said, if it fits both the company and Kansas State University, a holistic relationship where they support that whole list of activities is ideal. It doesn't mean that an individual relationship isn't important, because it can be very important to faculty's career. But if you really want to have the major impact on the university, you want that holistic relationship. Landscape roles have changed, and I'll tell you they're going to change more as we go through that. My major professor said you always end a slide with take-home message. And these are my take-home messages on this whole system. And that is to seek opportunities to develop relationship with the private sector. They won't necessarily come to you. Use the resources that Richard has in his office, the resources Mitzi has in those relationships, and do a search on the companies in your area that you think would have a good relationship. That's what I did early in my career. Actually, one of the relationships I started was with a scientist at Kansas State University very early in my career. Set expectations up front. Set expectations up front. You know, they don't know how to work in our system, and we don't know how to work in their system. But if you sit down with a good, honest conversation, as we did after the bad experience with soybeans, with spring wheat, it didn't take us more than a half-a-day meeting to set that relationship together and expectations. And we even settled the discussion on the publishing of the results that the graduate student ultimately did publish in that case, which can be a sticking point. Get to know each other. That's so critical. You know, we talk a lot about culture. Get to know each other's culture. Make sure that it fits. Fits you, fits the institution. And I would say they're our future. They're your future. And I'm specifically talking to faculty here of how we move forward with the development of knowledge and products. With that, if I have any time left, which should be about right, I will gladly try to answer any questions, or either I'll ask Kirk to answer them, because he didn't have any. Questions? Comments? No questions? Yeah. I think so our audiences at the other campuses can hear that. Come to the mic, please.
Yeah, so what's the role of basic research in these public-private partnerships when industry is more interested in immediate returns than long-term returns?
Good question. And everyone heard the question. I don't like the word basic. I like fundamental and translational. They're the same thing that we're talking. Well, yeah, foundation is basic. Basic.
Foundational,
Okay.
translational not.
Okay. It's been my experience in 2 cases now where I've dealt specifically with companies, and they've known that what we're doing is at least 3 to 4 generations away from anything having marketability. And so I would call that basic research. They've been willing, if I can bridge that between what we are today to what that ultimately is. If you can't make that bridge, then it's a tough sale, in my opinion. But if you can make that bridge of what that impact's going to have down the road, and they know they're gambling on a high risk, because there's no guarantees on that road 3 to 4 generations down of development. Okay? So I found them amenable in 2 cases. In my own example, well, one's my own and the other is another institution example that I worked with, not here. Okay? That's my answer. Yes, Prima.
Fred, your slide suggests that industry R&D has been increasing.
Yes.
But I think that what we're hearing today is that industry is reducing its R&D. It's eliminating R&D branches. So what's that opportunity window for the partnership now when you talk about new paradigms?
It's greater. As companies, once again, it depends on the sector. And you saw the blip that occurred in 2009 and 2008 with the private sector. as they view the in-house expensive R&D, there's greater opportunity to partner with us being academia, us being other nonprofits, because then it's an opportunity for us to partner to do the R&D in a more cost-effective. So when it's cost-effective, I'm not speaking just for us. I'm also speaking for the private sector. It's more cost-effective for them. So it actually, in my opinion, it actually increases it. It'll be interesting to see what these numbers are in 5 years. I think there will be a reduction just because of the economics of the situation. I think there will also be more public partnerships because it's pressure to move that way, my opinion. And you're nodding, so you must agree. Okay. Any other last question? I think I'm about out of time if I timed it right. Well, hearing none, I'm going to turn it over to the Vice President for HRIS, Karen Burg, who's going to kind of talk about the role and the changing role of coming to this system that we're in. I assume we need to change the PowerPoint. I'm going to close this before Karen starts to encourage you to really look at opportunities. I had the opportunity to work with entrepreneurship, not even knowing what it was. My definition is to seek opportunities, and I think that's what you need to do. Now, you have to take calculated risk. But I think just to look at them isn't enough. I think you have to seek those opportunities. And I think the opportunities, as Prima said in her question, are greater today than they have ever been. Thank you.
That's on the east coast of Kansas, right near Kansas City.
Maybe it's Tuttle Lake.
There we go.
Tuttle Creek.
You should be down here.
Okay, that should elicit a how many engineers or how many faculty members type of joke. Does it take to get a PowerPoint going? I'll leave those in my head. But I did want to say this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And so I'm really grateful for the Planning Committee. Realize those of us that were not a part of the Planning Committee, for every 2 things that we see that are wrinkles or things that have gone wrong, there are about 40 things that have gone right. And so I'm really grateful to the Planning Committee for putting together a whole lot of work in the background. It takes an enormous amount of effort and people to get the logistics and everything in shape. So hats off to all of you and a big thank you. I did want to give a little bit more sort of from the faculty student type perspective, and I'm going to walk down memory lane a little bit and pull from some personal examples from my past as to how we might think about coming a little bit closer to the center, if you will, in working with industry partners. So in other words, if we expect industry partners to come to us and to jump into our environment, we're probably not going to have that happen very often. And so how do we think about that, given that we have certain drivers, we have deliverables, we have expectations of us on a university campus? How do we mesh that with this idea of reaching out to a completely different set of what I would call a completely different sector and partner and still achieve the things that we need to achieve in a day? So I'm going to start in memory lane with my advisor. So this was my advisor at Clemson University when I was a graduate student, Shalaby. And you know of his work, because I guarantee you, all of you know of what happens when you have a cut or some type of wound that requires stitching or a suture. He is the inventor of record on many, I'd say probably about 99% of the degradable sutures, so the ones that are used usually internally, and then they require no removal surgery because they break down in the body. He was a polymer chemist, and yet he was in an engineering environment. He worked for about 30 years in industry and then decided to jump into the wild world of academia. He was there for only 3 years. He advised 21 of us in the 3 years. So those of you who think that 1 or 2 students is a large load, take note. He also taught a full set of classes and carried on all the duties of a faculty member. He also brought a range of corporate contracts with him, and he was very much focused on developing more of those relationships at the university. So this was a very intriguing type of training for me and for my colleagues, my 20 colleagues, who were fortunate enough to interact with him on a daily basis. It was really interesting because everything at the time was very, what I would call, academic. This was not something that was common. And so as I looked around at other people in my department, my home department was bioengineering, I saw very, very different courses of study. I saw a lot of discourse. I saw open defenses. I saw meetings where, you know, many, many things were talked about. Yet my advisor insisted on us being very, very tight-lipped about our work. We had closed defenses. We had closed committee meetings. Very secretive in a lot of ways. I remember a good friend of mine, every Thursday we would go to the gym and we would play basketball, and one week he became very strange about why he wasn't available on a Thursday. And I thought, what in the world, you know, what's going on here? Good friend of mine. And he just, the more questions I asked, you know, why can't we go, the cagier he got. And then finally, because I'm a nosy person, I said one more time, you know, why aren't you available? And he said, well, I'm flying to Europe. And he was red-faced and everything else. And Dr. Shalby had told him, you know, that he would be part of some conversations with a company that they were trying to do business with, and he could not tell anybody about that. And you can imagine, as a student in rural South Carolina, a graduate student, this is not the norm, flying to Europe on a whim. And so for us, this was really mind-boggling to think. Now I look back on that, and that very conversation, that very simple conversation that incorporated a graduate student, was the basis for a company that's now a global company. Incredible opportunity, and it was very interesting for me at the time to see two very different worlds, an academic world and a corporate world, and many times they collided. And our goal as the 20 of my colleagues and my goal was not to be caught in the middle of that collision. And that wasn't always possible. Sometimes we were trapped in the middle because we had the tug from academia and we had the tug of our advisor's corporate world, which he was introducing to us and to the university. And so it's those reflections that I've looked at, and I think about all the wonderful things that I learned from that experience and continuing on, and I think how times have changed and how wonderful it is that we're embracing, you know, as a community, as an academic community, that we're actually embracing these opportunities and really trying to determine how we can best work with different companies. So Dr. Shalby had close to 200 patents, and so he started a small company. He left the university setting, and I'm sure he was very frustrated with all of us, but what he took the time to do was to learn about the operation of the university. I have no idea if that was in his intent going in, but boy, he sure made it an output when he left. That he knew the environment, he knew what he considered to be the peculiarities, and he used that to his advantage as he built a small company and grew that into a global enterprise, because he connected back with many universities, not just his former institution, but many universities, to be able to make deals that I claim he would not have been able to make had he not had that insight and not had those experiences and really understood that he too needed to understand the drivers and deliverables of an academic institution. So how do we do that? We do have two very different environments, and I claim that we have been handed an exciting thing, and that's a box of puzzle pieces. As you know, these are global problems, real-world problems. They're not simple. They don't all come in K-State purple. They come in different varieties, and we're told, okay, this is the problem we're going to work on, or maybe we select the problem that we're going to work on. But what we're not realizing is that there may be 5 other puzzles included in that. And so we're trying to determine, not having complete information and having mixed information, what the picture is on our purple puzzle. And that's, to me, that's what RSCAD is about. That's what the process is about. And that's the same box of puzzles, whether we're working for a corporate entity or whether we're working at a university. The real-world problems are multidisciplinary. And so I would claim, beyond this concept that we have on a university of working across disciplines, that we also have to work across sectors. And so there's nothing more frightening to me than the idea of trapping ideas on a campus. There's so many exciting ideas. And that's the beauty of, you know, a university setting, is you get all these crazy ideas and, you know, the continuum of ideas and ideas that are out there, not part of the continuum. But if we leave them on the campus, then what purpose does that solve? Other than, you know, promoting ourselves or promoting our own area or just, conducting work for the sake of our own enjoyment. I really, really feel strongly about having impact and knowing the connection between the ideas that we're generating and the real world and how that impacts in a positive fashion. And I always use the example, in the real world, we take this for granted. We buy a car, we buy a house, buy whatever, and it's been designed. Whatever it is, it's been designed by a team of people. So a house wasn't designed just by a team of plumbers. If it was, probably would look very strange. So we take that for granted in everyday living, but it seems to get a little bit peculiar when we're on a university campus. We tend to be more compartmentalized. And I think it goes beyond working across disciplines. It goes to working across sectors, where a sector might be the academic sector, and then the industry sector, the not-for-profit, government sector. We really have to span those different sectors, and those are all very, very different and have very different environments, but they're all necessary to come together at this one common place to be able to solve these really complex problems. And so let's look at the different environments. So this may be something that you know extremely well, something you've never thought about before, but I think it's pretty obvious that at the university, we have certain drivers. So if you're a faculty member, the drivers are generally research, publications related with that, grants related with that, your teaching, service activities. I know when I first sat down with a dean of engineering on an interview trip as a junior faculty member, I remember him saying to me, and he gave me a spiel about what the goals were of the university and the college and so forth. And he said, Karen, your performance, it's about scholarship. It's not about dollarship. And I said in my head to myself, but you just showed me an Excel spreadsheet, and the boxes seem to be formatted to currency. So how does that add up? That it's about, how are you measuring, how are you inputting scholarship in your Excel spreadsheet when the only thing there is a row of dollars and probably an additional row of that would accommodate numbers for publications. And so I think, at the time I was coming from a postdoctoral career, and I had 2 issued patents at the time, and I had 1 disclosure and patent application pending. And so I asked about intellectual property because that wasn't represented in his master spreadsheet. And there wasn't. The message was given fairly clearly to me that that's okay, you can do that on your own time, but here's what you need to do. Yet to me, scholarship meant, developing new things, innovation, translating things, and, developing ideas that could eventually be used. And if that meant in the form of patents, then it seems like that was, worthy of being considered, as one was evaluating faculty members. So I don't think that's an issue that has changed considerably. I think there are pockets, as you look across any university campus, where you find people, tenure and promotion committees are very, very familiar and comfortable and promote this idea of intellectual property development. I think you find other pockets of campus where it's probably met with high disdain, and regarded as a, quote, waste of time. And so we still very much have to address this as a community if we do want to edge closer, to finding that central place where we can meet with our corporate partners. Personal freedom, obviously, I already mentioned the continuum and the fact that you can have the wackiest idea on the planet and pursue that. And what a wonderful thing. I remember working as a postdoc. I was working on a funded project by a company, and I kept coming, this was the first weeks of my employment, and I was very excited coming off of, my graduation high. And I had all these ideas, and here's what we can do, and I see you have this problem, I'm gonna be the helper and problem solver. And I kept getting gently pushed back. No, we're not going that direction. And then finally, it was befuddling to me, even though I had, very much come from, an advisor who had a corporate mindset. It didn't occur to me that we were being guided by the patent portfolio. That was the company's patent portfolio that was funding us. So I was naming all kinds of things that would have been great for the competition, but not great for the company. And once I realized that, it totally changed my agenda and my mindset and my day-to-day work activities and my goals. So we have that as well. That's a huge benefit for working at a university. We want a luxury to be able to work on whatever idea that pops to mind, more or less. Costs. We have a different language when we talk about costs. This is a sensitive issue across many campuses. We talk about indirect costs, and we think everybody knows what that means. Well, to many in industry, that's as though, I said that in Spanish, and they are speaking Greek. And so it's two completely different languages. Companies understand costs. Indirect sounds a little suspicious. Sounds to me like you're trying to pay for something that isn't related to my work, because why would you call it an indirect cost if that's the case? Companies know what the cost of doing business is. It's the same thing, but we use two different sets of words to describe it. So again, a huge difference in culture, in this case, in language. Meetings on the academic side, you know it, admit it, guys, we love to meet. We love to talk and meet and share ideas, and that's what we should be doing, because we are really generating, we're factories of ideas, and ideas come from meeting, talking, and having good discourse, arguments, back and forth, disagreements, promotes more ideas and so forth. Industry, that's regarded, time is money. There was nothing more upsetting to my advisor than if one of us showed up late for a meeting, because that was his money that you were destroying and taking away from him. And we learned pretty quickly that that was something that was not to be disturbed, because he took it very literally. Time is money. I could be working on something else. You have destroyed the day by taking too long, and you need to have a succinct message and stay within the bounds of the time, because otherwise you're using up extra money that we simply do not have. My first department head, when I joined the university, had probably been having a bad day. He'd spent many years in industry and now had moved up through the faculty ranks fairly quickly to become department head. And I think he was just venting. I think it could have been me or anybody else. And he said, "Karen, it's pretty easy to know how to manage. You just have to understand the drivers. And at a university, it's all about ego and envy. And in industry, it's about fear and greed. That's all you need to know." And he had a great sense of humor about it, but if you think about it, there might be a little grain of truth to some of this. And I think the bigger, more important point is that, again, very, very different cultures, and understanding that and understanding what somebody has to deliver at the end of the day is really a key to being able to work with them. Because again, if you feel that they are going to work on your turf and share your common goal, they're not. They have a completely different set of things upon which they're being graded and ranked. So again, I think it's all good if we understand there's two different cultures. For me, coming in as a junior faculty member in my field, again, bioengineering or biomedical engineering, the other important thing was, how long would it take me to see the product of my work? That's what really was going to drive me to work with corporate partners or not. I mean, it was really important to me. And this was a very popular graph that was shown back in 2004, specifically for the area in which I was working, which was tissue engineering. And so basically, without getting bogged in on the detail, it said it was going to take a really long time for a company to take an idea that I had and translate it to reality, because there were all kinds of Food and Drug Administration approvals, there were trials that had to go through, and the sad reality was there are many, many things that never make it fully through all of these lines. And so for me, this was very depressing. And I said, well, why would this is not motivating at all. Why would I sign on to this? I want to be able to see. I mean, it was a selfish reason, but I want to be able to see the results of my work. And so I had to rethink, what are some other ways that I could partner with the corporate world and not have to spend 8 years following, and that's following a lot of years, building the idea to that handoff. In other words, never seeing that. And so for that, I had to start thinking, well, what is it that a company is looking for? And so most companies are not going to give philanthropically for the sake of saying good things by themselves. As you've seen, in Fred's talk, that there is a battery, and I think also in President Schulz's talk, there's a large range of things that they may be involved in, and one thing might be philanthropic giving, but that's probably not going to be the first approach. There's probably building of trust and some sort of deliverable that then encourages them to say, hey, here's some additional opportunities. And so as investigators, we think about encapsulating our ideas. A company doesn't want to know that, okay, I'm going to give you money, you're going to work on this project, and then you're going to sing it around the globe, you're going to publish it everywhere, and then I won't have the rights. All my competitors will be making this as well, which seems like an obvious thing to say, but that's what draws us back into the tech transfer system. And so the universities all have a system for capturing those ideas, which make them far more appealing to corporate partners. In the bio world, and this varies depending on what type of bio, certainly in the biomedical world, a lot of the ideas are so high risk that it has to be an issued patent because it's an awful lot of money that's involved. Remember the graphs, to take an idea and then find out that, ooh, we don't actually have the rights to it. So there's less in that arena of companies buying in early to something that hasn't been issued in the form of patent and or patent portfolios. The classic goal for universities, and I'll hopefully stimulate some controversial thought by saying I think it is the classic goal, and perhaps we should change our thinking, is licenses and royalties. So remember my conversation with the dean and his spreadsheet of, let's be very quantitative. This is a very quantitative, easy way to measure things. And so traditionally, universities tend to look at licenses and royalties as being a sign of good, bad. Greater is good, lesser is bad. We've already hit on a few ideas. Why is this even important? Why should I worry about this? There's all kinds of reasons. I would claim that reason number 3, generating income, at an investigator level, having a little bit of seed money, that type of thing is nice. I would claim as a university, the numbers aren't there to support. When you think about the amount of money in the university budget, which we're all focused on this week and in the spring, as President Schulz said, it really is a drop in the bucket compared with that. So to rationalize and say this is going to support the university, that's probably not good rationale. So most people go to, well, hey, the University of Florida has Gatorade, and look at what that's done. And that's true, but look at all the patents that did not produce that. And so I think keeping some semblance of balance as to, why we want to pursue that is really, really important. There are many other good reasons for doing this, generating ideas, recruitment, economic growth and development. There are many good ideas, but any one standalone probably isn't sustainable. I've drawn here the case state process for commercialization, and this is very similar to many universities. You could take out a few steps or substitute some acronyms and so forth. But essentially, a company can plug in. There are many different ways along this path for a company to plug in. So it may be as early as the idea stage, in some cases in a center or an institute. There may be, and we have opportunities here, and we have examples here of that. Or it may be later in the game after intellectual property has been developed. And so there are many different opportunities and ways of connecting with corporate partners. And that's a major part of what this series is about, our workshop series, is to introduce those of you who aren't familiar with those steps and stages as to how to plug in. And for those of you who are very familiar, to give us feedback on how to improve those pieces and entities and the flow. One thing that when I started as a junior faculty member, there was a lot of pressure at the time nationally that, if you had an idea, then you would automatically, if it was patentable, then you would go for a startup. That was just kind of common thinking at the time. And it really wasn't good thinking because not every idea is worthy of a startup. And not every faculty member at a university should be also, heading up their own company. And that was basically it. Well, you can head up this company, put this hat on over here, and then stand over here and develop ideas for your company. And so, again, happily, we've changed our mindset. And I've listed a few different ways of connecting in, and these are just a few. There are many different ways of connecting with companies. The one I'm probably most enthusiastic about is these technology maturation companies. So these are companies that may look at different technologies on campuses, and they may say, ooh, here's a nice K-State one that we like. There may be another one at Wisconsin that they like. They cobble together a portfolio with the idea that they're going to start a small business. They fund the research because there's usually a gap between where the university ideas end and where a business, a corporate portfolio would begin, they fund research to cover that chasm with the idea of building this company. Many of them, the long-term goal is to sell off the company, for example, to a Fortune 500. So they're in the business of creating new companies and selling them, creating new companies and selling them. And these are becoming more and more common and are actually a really good way, in many cases, of plugging in. One option only. Then there are the obvious ones, translation directly to a company or licensing to a company, sponsorship of research with company. Having said that, the majority of the US job growth is because of small company growth. Again, not a good reason to say, that's why we need to push every single idea toward developing a company. That just happens to be a fact. That's where the job growth resides. There are agencies that are more and more federal agencies are looking at things that they have funded on the scientific side and saying, okay, we don't want these ideas sitting on shelves. We'd like to, again, cross that chasm, and we'd like to actually take those really good ideas that were generated and delineated in the final report and don't seem to be going anywhere else except maybe being funded through a new grant application. Can we take those and can those become translatable? And so the National Science Foundation has a program. I use this by way of example because there are other federal agencies that are developing similar programs. It's called the I-Corps program. And here in this case, you had to be funded by the National Science Foundation and had a grant, a minimum of a grant, funded by them, and then you developed a team. And the team had a faculty mentor, a mentee, could be a postdoc, graduate student, undergraduate, and an industry advisor. And the idea was that you had the sectors interacting. And then there was boot camp. And so you would go for a defined number of months, and you had X number of practitioners that you had to talk to. So you had to talk to corporate partners. In the case of these teams, they had to talk to surgeons, and they had to talk to medical personnel because these were biomedical based. And so at that point, at the end of it, you had to come up with a business plan to say, is this an idea that should be spun out? Is it something suitable for a patent and a license? Is this just a great idea that's fun, that would be great grant material, grant application material, but really doesn't have legs on it at this point for translation? So the team on the left, some of you may recognize, Tim Burg from electrical engineering here at K-State. He and I co-advised this young man, Joseph. And so Joseph had great dreams. He was working on a project. It was a tool, minimally invasive surgical tool, a widget. So none of these FDA type complications that would expand the project for 8 years. This was his dream. I am the entrepreneur and I'm going to be bringing in lots of money because I am going to spin this out into a company. That's his thought going into the NSF I-Corps program. And after the boot camp of going around talking to practitioners, attending workshops with the National Science Foundation where they brought in industry consultants and so forth, this was what he found. And they actually won a business plan competition for this, not because they came up with the final solution of this is going to make the bag of money, but because they came up with a very good, honest business plan as to why it didn't have the legs on it as a standalone company, and why it would be better to partner with a company and cultivate more information, why it would be good to partner with an association that actually dealt with the regulation of these surgical tools and get more information and then move it probably toward a patent portfolio in an existing company. And so these types of things, the National Institutes of Health, there are several foundations, the Avon Foundation, many others are starting to see this as a way because they are concerned. They have funded an awful lot of projects that have ended up in publication, but they haven't moved beyond that. So that's a great way to get the ball rolling. It also provides you with contacts off of the university campus. These are some numbers that I pulled from the Association of University Technology Managers Survey. And for those of you who don't know, Paul Lowe, where are you sitting, Paul? Right there is a leader in this organization. This is a National Academies organization for the purpose of encouraging and stimulating interaction between companies, between industry and academia. And so I pulled the numbers, the most recent numbers of 2012. And so on the left-hand side, you can see the number or the amount of license income in millions and the number of institutions. So I think there were about 200 and some institutions that were polled and about 100 and some responded. And so what you're seeing is that response rate. Most of them fall in this category, which is where K-State falls. On the patent applications, you can see again, the number of institutions greater than 1,000 or 0 to 10. And here comes my, my controversial thinking. Again, this is very quantitative, and if you look at this, and if you're basing success or failure on this, then let's have everybody submit patent applications willy-nilly and not worry about whether they're meaningful or not. It'd be fairly simple to have a lot of widgets out there that are worth nothing more than giant paperweights. And so I will also say, disclaimer, there's a little bit of apples and oranges. So this greater than 1,000, you think, who in the world was that did that? It's actually a university system. So there are many systems across the U.S. Maryland has a system, for example, but they break down the numbers for the purpose of this survey into individual institutions. The California actually has 2 systems, and they're research intensive. Their PhD offering schools are the aggregate here. So that's why it's more than 1,000, because they're aggregating the numbers from all of the schools within that system. So you also have to worry about that when you're comparing numbers, and if that's set as a metric for success or failure of K-State, for example, that's kind of a disturbing thing not to wrap your head around the complete picture behind the numbers. And so I would claim, each sector has a role. Again, it's really, really important. I don't feel we should be trying to clone the corporate environment on our campus. We should be really excited about playing into this pool as the experts that we are, the ideas generators, the innovators, and understanding the corporate mindset and playing within that to the extent necessary to be able to move our ideas forward and to be able to partner and really affect the world in a positive way. Having said that, I also have posed the question, do we have incomplete goals? So remember, I showed you the 2 metrics, licenses, royalties. Is that really a fair assessment of how we're doing at a university? Should that be what we base, K-State's progress on? And I would claim that we really need to think about innovation, and we have to do this in a holistic fashion. I mean, the problem with this is we can't quantitate it. It's really difficult. We can provide a semi-quantitative analysis, but it's really difficult. I mean, think about, if you're on a tenure and review committee and you're trying to assess someone's contribution to innovation, it's going to have to be a little more complex than adding up the number of patent applications or the number of patents or the amount of royalty that particular individual has been affiliated with. And so it's not a simple solution, but I would claim we're more than those numbers that historically have been used to base success or failure. So the question was asked earlier, Mike, I think you asked about fundamental research or basic research, and then the fundamental translational commentary. How does that play into this? And is a perfect setup, I hope, because I've thought about this really carefully in my own work. I always wanted to have my students exposed to something from the corporate sector, and so I always had a corporate grant or contract throughout my faculty career. The idea that was in the background was something that was funded by a federal agency and what I would call the long pass. So the idea was basic science, or the idea was something so crazy that no company would think of it. But what happened was, as I started thinking about this, to get to that long pass, there were many enabling technologies that had to be produced, developed, tweaked, refined. And again, this is specific to my area, so you can translate that to your own area. But what I found was these enabling technologies were highly patentable. And so we weren't trying to wrap intellectual property around, we're creating a beating heart, for example. We have the basic science involved in that. We weren't trying to patent that. That would be crazy. We could probably patent some aspect of that, but it wouldn't make sense to a company. But what did make sense to a lot of companies was widgets like these that we were producing as we went along pursuing our basic science questions. So we simply had to put a different pair of glasses on and look at it from that perspective, that there are some industry-friendly aspects of this. Not every student had to be involved with an industry project, but I very much wanted them all to be exposed to the level of thinking, and have that as they advance in their career, regardless of their, of their long-term plans. This particular widget, this was one of the enabling technologies that we wrapped intellectual property around, and this was actually spun out. It was an example of something that was successfully spun out into a startup company. So 2 of my former students are the owners and operators of this company, which is actually producing product and which is actually also serving as a diagnostics lab. And they've been very successful in receiving many business awards because they did this very thoughtfully and with a great deal of insight and experiences in the technology transfer world. And they most recently received money from the National Institutes of Health for phase 1 and then most recently phase 2, small business innovation research. And there's plenty of opportunities in there through this mechanism and also the STTR mechanism, both at the National Science Foundation and the National Institutes of Health, for partnering between companies and between institutions. So again, this was an enabling technology. This was set within the bounds of a grant. The initial grant that stimulated that enabling technology had nothing to do with making widgets. The making a widget was something that was necessary to that. So this was funded through the National Science Foundation PCASE mechanism, and what it did was it afforded the opportunity to have an enormous number of undergraduates and graduate students and teachers and K-12 students to be involved with this, and similarly to be affected by the fact that they were seeing commercial products coming out of this, what appeared to be a basic science grant, and yet they were seeing the products in the world. And so for me, it was really important that those individuals all be exposed to that, not that they all wanted to run into industry, but so that they were exposed to it and understood that aspect because they had been there and been involved in the middle of that. And I use this as, again, a personal example. These are where some of my students have gone. And what I really love about this is that there's a distribution. My goal wasn't to send all of my students to a university. I wanted to send all of the students out into the world being savvy about what it took to work with a university if they were at a company, or a company if they were at a university, or if they're a not-for-profit government agency, what would it take to work with the other 2 entities. And so seeing the range across that makes me smile because I feel that the distribution really reinforces the fact that a university can have a really large influence on students and the marketability of their skills such that they can go into whichever avenue they want. They have enough knowledge and wherewithal to be able to be leaders in innovation, whether it's at a university or not. And so the problems are complex. Again, this is my take-home message slide, Fred. Hopefully you see yourself up there in some form or fashion. A typical complaint to me is, I'm a humanist and I don't see myself in that. And so I know we are soliciting ideas for workshops. I would say team building is one of them because I would say the humanists are a critical part of team building that makes projects attractive to companies in the corporate world. There is a place for everyone. When you look at these real-world problems, these are not isolated to engineering problems or physical science problems or life science problems. They're not isolated to any one discipline. It's a cross-section of disciplines. So hopefully you recognize your own passion on the slide. So with that, we need contributions from the different sectors. Our goal is to move closer, or at least to evaluate whether we as individuals want to move closer to jumping into corporate partnerships. And so to do that, to hopefully whet your interest, we have a series of workshops. I'm going to step through them very quickly. Upcoming sessions, Lunch and Learn. Lunch right there should attract you right off the bat, saying, I've got to sign up for that one. Making Sense of K-State's Alphabet Soup. And you will notice very cleverly in K-State Purple, we have some examples of alphabet soup. Even KSU is alphabet soup. We want to be nationally and internationally known. And if we say KSU in the greater Atlanta area, that means Kennesaw State University. No, we don't want that. We want our good work associated with our name. And so we'll go through that. There are an enormous number of acronyms, and so wading through that, will be a big part of that particular workshop. And then if you remember my schematic showing the patenting process, again, that's a good chance for those who aren't familiar with it to learn, and for those who are familiar to give us feedback on where you think the schematic doesn't match reality. The second one, February 12th, we have the executive director, remember, of that UIDP group that provided the data. So this is an awesome opportunity to hear from that individual directly. We also have a panel of faculty. I noticed the faculty on this campus are very reserved, and so maybe quiet. No. We'll have a lot of good, lively discussion from different faculty who've been there, done that, and can speak to that whole idea of how do we balance expectations, knowing what we're being graded on versus this type of activity. How does that fit into the mix? So you'll get a whole different set of expectations and opinions. February 24th, Making the Connection, Part 2, because Part 1 wasn't enough to cover all those topics. Who to call for on-campus assistance, that's a good one. This is a good starting point here. Richard, for all things corporate, is a good one to start with, and he can dispatch you to other people, but this is an opportunity for you to learn the faces and names with the other people as well. And then how research relates to economic development. Communication and marketing, we'll have a more extended one. We'll start thinking about how to develop your message. I will say I can't think of one corporate interaction that I've had, and I've had many, where I've sent in a formal cold request for money, or for support or for interaction. It's been a conversation in an airport, randomly sitting next to a stranger who happened to work at such and such, and being a good Southerner by roots, I can talk and get into a conversation and find out there's an opportunity. It's been sitting on an airplane, it's been at a conference dinner, it's been truly in an elevator. I mean, there are all these opportunities, but you have to be ready. You have to know what your skill set is, and you have to know how to sell it really quickly in a sound bite. And so we'll start talking about that on February 24th. And then March 10th, how to formalize the relationship. And again, this will be a guest speaker who is a director in industry, and so she can speak from the industry side about budgets and so forth. Again, we tend to use a different language, thinking everyone understands our language, and so she'll speak to that. And that's something where Fred mentioned you want to go in up front with the agreement, just as you would on a publication, who's going to be first author, who's going to be last. You don't want to have these ugly feelings after the fact. So you want to go in completely on the same page, that these are the ground rules, and we have everything sewn up. So if something comes up, then here's how we will behave, essentially. Conflict of interest. March 26th, managing expectations and the relationship. So again, a director from industry talking about timelines. This is a pet peeve of people in corporate America. They say we in academe have no sense of time or space, and no sense of deliverables and timelines. So we're going to talk about that. What does it mean? I mean, it's exciting to get the money, but then we have to deliver, because it's not just this project and this relationship, but it's the next one that we have to worry about as well. Because if we do a bad job of meeting deadlines or reporting or whatnot, then it's pretty unlikely, unless there's a miracle that occurs, that the company is going to come back and say, "Ooh, I really loved that sloppy behavior. Let's come back and give you another pile of money to be able to do that." So again, that's about building trust and sort of thinking about that ahead of the game, looking at the larger potential down the road. April 9th, developing and managing the project. Again, thinking of not putting the cart before the horse, so don't wait until the contract is issued and you've developed new intellectual property to decide where the rights go, who owns what. Deciding that up front, and then stewarding the relationship. Again, what are the expectations? How can we go the extra mile? Could we invite our corporate visitors in to meet with our students, say hello, showcase who they are, et cetera, those types of things. And again, who to contact for assistance. I believe all of these are either on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and they all have like a networking event following. So again, that should be incentive to come to those. All right, so those are the workshops. We are very open to new topics, and again, I'm throwing one out by way of starter, which is building teams. I would very much like to see that, campus-wide team and people's role in the teams. This is by way of advertisement. I'm involved in the first round of this AAAS Lemelson Ambassadors Program, and so I'm a guinea pig. So the good news is I have worked through the bugs as a guinea pig, and the next round is opening up. This is a group of individuals who get together, go around the country talking about innovation, talking about invention, talking with one another, talking with business entities, talking with non-business entities. The group is made up of individuals from the public and private sectors, so it's a really neat group to be a part of. I encourage those of you who have interest in these types of conversations that we've been having today to consider applying. And so you can go to the AAAS website. The applications are due in March. It's a fantastic opportunity to connect in on the national level to different groups across the nation. And so my underlying theme is innovation lies at the intersection of disciplines, but it also lies at the intersection of sectors, where we are the academic sector and we're reaching out to the government sectors and the corporate sectors as well. This is the Kanza Prairie, and yes, there are intersections there. And so the mandate is to find those and to move closer to those intersections to be able to fully partner and really find some exciting opportunity. So again, a big thank you to the organizing committee. I know Richard's going to handle a little bit of Q&A perhaps, although President Schulz has sneaked out in fear that you're going to ask him about the budget again. So.
Thank you, Karen. Well, I have been watching my email and the Twitter feed, and the one question I've received so far from that is, will there be PDF files of the speakers' presentations available? And the answer is yes, when we have permission of the speakers. So Fred, yes. Karen, we have permission to, yeah. So we're good there, and I'll double check with President Schulz, but I wrote his presentation, so I think it'll be okay. So yes, I have a couple, if you would please come forward to the microphone so that our friends online can hear the questions. And reminder online, if you want to send a question, the email address is rmpotter@ksu.edu. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Nora Bello, Statistics. I had a question for the speakers, please, in particular for Karen. It seemed like the focus was around products. The focus for corporate engagement was around products and patents and things. And I'm interested in the service piece, consulting service piece for corporate engagement, and how to bring that up to speed with the patent piece. There is something kind of organically developed here at K-State, but there's a lot of work to be done to expedite and facilitate and make things simple. So I wonder if that's something that is being considered in the context of expanding corporate engagements, the consulting service piece.
I don't know if I'm still mic'd up or not.
Yeah, I think you are. Yes, you still got, you're still hot, Karen.
Oh, I am.
Sorry, that was inappropriate. Your mic is still hot.
Moving on.
I hope I have a job tomorrow.
Yes, and so the interesting piece that I've discovered about K-State is that the fee for service is actually through the finance office, and the intellectual property and so forth is affiliated with the research office. And so yes, that's something that I've been looking at very closely, because the policies and so forth, are in one compact unit, but yet they're, the actual activities are found in two different units. So it definitely is, and Richard is, again, working hard to develop, first of all, a master list of where, database of where we already have interactions, and then where we have great potential for interactions. And that's a huge one, because that kind of work actually stimulates, companies' interest in other things as well. Thinking about that global picture of company involvement.
So this whole process, contracts, fee for service, that is a mess here. That's a mess. That needs a big overhaul. Contracts, as I said before, who to contact. I've been passed around by 20 offices here just to have one consulting contract revised. So, as we think about corporate engagement, not only the product piece, but the service piece, which gives us visibility even more so with the corporate community.
Yep, absolutely.
Other questions? If you could please come to the microphone. I thought I saw some other hands up there. Maybe not. Yes, please.
My name's Rob DeLong. I just joined the Nanotechnology Innovation Center a couple months ago, so I'm new, and I apologize if I don't know K-State that well. But I spent 5 or 6 years in the biopharma industry before transitioning back to academia, and I totally get that, you know, we want to try to translate intellectual property, you know, to back and forth through the corporate world. But one thing that in the biopharma industry, there's this thing called contract research organization. Many of the companies will farm out certain aspects that they don't want to do in-house. I just wonder if another model for engaging the corporate world, university corporate partnership, would be to look at the university as essentially a contract research organization, in the sense that, you know, could we establish an office or a partnership level where, you know, we could formalize industry coming to the university and looking for a particular set of professors' expertise. And I don't know, it's just a thought to throw out there.
Well, in fact, we're doing that in some cases. Paul, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and with those situations on the contract research, you know, being a public university, we have to find that balance because of the, believe it or not, IRS public policy mandates slip in there, and so, you know, one of our goals, you know, in the vice president's for research office is to protect your scholarship, and a lot of those contract research situations, you know, you're basically just pouring out results, you know, for the sole benefit of the company. And a lot of times they'll say, we have absolute complete control over that output. And so, you know, if you have an aspect of your scholarship that you can isolate for that purpose, then, you know, we can work around and try to figure out how to do that in a way that doesn't run afoul of those, you know, what they call the unrelated business income tax issues, the UBIT issues that we have to deal with. So those are, you know, very valid point, you know, to increase it, to expand the portfolio. That's something, you know, we need to look at, but we have those public policy constraints that we have to work on, you know, to pull that off. So most of the time, we spend the majority of our time trying to protect your scholarship so you can continue to expand that, especially if it's an early stage technology. But yeah, those are certain considerations we could look at as an institution. Does that answer your question?
Other questions? I do have one issue that I want to bring up, and that is with regard to the syllabus that we handed out. And ask if, as you've been sitting here thinking, are there some specific things that come to mind that you would like to be sure we include in future sessions? And while you're looking, I'll check my email one more time to see if there are any questions from folks who are watching the live video stream. And you'll have plenty of time to provide feedback on the syllabus later on. Our next session is February 12th. And so I'd encourage you to look at the syllabus and give us your feedback as soon as possible so that we have time to incorporate it if we can. One more opportunity for any questions. And I believe our refreshments are set up in the courtyard just outside. I want to thank everybody again for joining us today, and hope that you'll be back on February 12th and for sessions following that as well. Thanks again.